What's going on, everybody? Jackson Fuller here, and you are listening to the latest episode of Hoggin the Mic. It is Monday, June 3rd. It is a somber day in Fayetteville, Arkansas. The rain is coming down outside right now, and the Arkansas baseball season is over a lot earlier, I think, than any of us expected, especially a couple months ago. We will dive in deep into the Fayetteville Regional, what exactly happened to the Hogs, and I think a lot of this podcast will also touch on maybe some overall problems with the entire season, where the program goes from here. But I don't know about Hutch. For me, I'm still pretty optimistic with how things are being run at the head of the Arkansas baseball program. We'll see what Hutch says, if he agrees with me or not, in just a little bit. Let's play that rock music, bring in my co-host, and get this episode of Hoggin the Mic rolling. Hutch, how's it going, man? Is it relief? Is it sadness that the baseball season's over? We as journalists, we get a little bit of a break now, but no Omaha trip. And I gotta say, it was a little sad up there in the press box, just following these guys, all year. A great group of individuals and coaches, I know they're very, very disappointed in the end result. What are kind of your emotions right now as another Arkansas baseball season comes to a close for you, who's been covering this team for a while now?
Yeah, it was a little bit disappointing. It's you kind of get spoiled here. Getting to make trips to Omaha on a somewhat regular basis. So now back-to-back years that don't even get to cover a super regional. It feels a little bit weird, a little bit sad. I personally I like baseball season to go as long as possible because that puts off the random off-season football content that I got to create. So it's a little bit of a bummer. I'm not gonna lie. I was kind of hoping and looking forward to making the trek north again.
Yeah, coming your way Thursday, everybody, on the Southwest Times website. Quarterback preview, Arkansas football. Taylon Green, the leader of the bunch. I'm only half joking there. I think we are going to start some positional previews soon. So, but yeah, it's weird now to kind of think of what's the rest of the summer for us. Of course, I imagine those feelings are only a lot higher, for the baseball team themselves and the coaches and players and the families and everything. Let's dive into this weekend specifically first. They get things really going on Friday afternoon with a 17-9 win over SEMO. The bats get hot. I think there's a lot of confidence brewing from the team. It seemed that way from DVH and company. After that game, they felt like they were in a great spot to, they get to Saturday. And, I think we spoke about this a little bit in the press box on Sunday, Hutch, that if you what would the Arkansas win probability of not just that game, but the entire regional had been entering the bottom of the fifth with a 2-0 lead and Hagen Smith on the mound, would have been very high. But of course, Hagen gives up 6 runs in that 5th inning. Kansas State goes on to beat Arkansas 7-6, send the Hogs to the losers bracket. And as DVH said, as I kind of pointed out in the press box, Arkansas just had no energy in that final game. A very quick turnaround. They looked like they had gotten punched in the face from last night, still kind of reeling from the loss to Kansas State. And SEMO finishes the season off with a 6-3 win over Arkansas. Congratulations to Kansas State for winning the Fayetteville Regional. They beat the Red Hawks later that day. As I correctly predicted, I think the worst team in the NCAA tournament won the Fayetteville Regional. But I didn't realize Kansas State was a preseason top 25 team according to D1 Baseball. So plenty of talent there. Okay, that little recap's all out of the way. Hutch, is it really as simple as they lost the Hagen Smith smart, and once that happened, this team was kind of doomed for the weekend?
Yeah, because I think that was twofold. Because not only did you lose a game that you expected to win because you had Hagen on the mound, but then there's that lingering effect of seeing your dude, the best pitcher in college baseball, get smacked for 6 runs in 1 inning. I feel like that would probably have a lingering effect on the team. It would be very similar to like if the 2001 team ever saw Kevin Kopps just get hammered, which never really happens, even in his final start. And because there's just such an emotional boost there. But it was a little bit different with Hagen because with Kevin, it seemed like every time Kopps came in the game, the offense got going. So like, oh shit, here's Kevin Kopps. We're gonna win this game, and then they would go, score several more runs. Hagen never got much run support. He got a little bit this past. They did end up scoring 6 runs, but most of that was after he had already left the game. So, it had to have been lingering into the next day. In addition to the quick turnaround and everything like that, when as we were saying, everything looked great. Everything up until that 5th inning was going Arkansas's way. The bottom of the 5th inning, because you had the weather delays on Friday that made the Kansas State and Louisiana Tech stay until late in the day. I think they left. I think it was finally called at like 11:30 that night, so they probably don't get back to the hotel until after midnight. They got to be back at the ballpark to resume their game at 11. They got to finish it off. Louisiana Tech, the most dangerous team you thought in the regional, goes down 0-2. It really looked like it was setting up for Arkansas, and then you throw in the 2-0 lead. It just really seemed like Arkansas was going to do it, and then when they didn't, I feel like that was maybe just too much of an emotional thing to overcome.
It was a shock. I mean, I think you wrote about this. We definitely talked about this. That bottom of the 5th inning, 2 strikes on the leadoff batter, walk. The next guy, 2 strikes, walk. Then a sacrifice bunt, 2 strikes, 0-2 on the next guy, single to right field. On the next batter, 2 strikes, 1-2 count, single to right field. The best pitcher in the country, in not only in just an overall pitcher, but as a strikeout guy. He got to 2 strikes on 4 straight batters aside from the sacrifice bunt from Kansas State, and he couldn't put them away. And then you have the 3-run homer from Kalen Culpepper. That was the kind of the finishing blow, but really the big inning started with those 2 walks, and it's just a shame. I feel bad for Hagen. I know how much he really wanted to kind of right the wrongs of last postseason. He wasn't able to do it. Some really interesting stuff from DVH in the post-game press conference about Hagen, not after the Kansas State game, after the SEMO game. The season's officially over. He knows Hagen's gone, and he's been so complimentary of Hagen all year. And I know Dave, he didn't really trash Hagen. He's not, it's hard to trash the guy that's carried your entire program. And he gave him a lot of compliments, but he did sneak in there. He thinks Hagen got a little bit tired. They tried to save some innings from him earlier in the year. They didn't get those innings in the postseason. I think it's something to be mindful of as we watch Hagen kind of progress, is how his fitness, his longevity in games, just his overall ability to go deep. That's a huge question for him moving forward in the majors or in professional baseball. Maybe he's just a reliever, going forward, and an ace, top of the line, 99 percentile reliever. But it just was kind of crazy. It kind of made sense there at the end that there definitely were some questions within the program about how could this guy maintain his pace all season long.
Yeah, I think that's something that's going to be very, very interesting to watch at the next level. He was a tremendous starter in college. This year I think maybe he gets too much of a bad rap for his ability to work deeper in games, because he did pretty consistently give you 6 innings. Almost every single time out he gave you 6. He had like a 7-inning start mixed in there. That's pretty good. If you can get 6 innings of dominant pitching, from your Friday night guy, you take that every day of the week. So it was a little tough to see it end the way it did. I don't know what was going on, but and plus, we also got to talk about a little bit too that it was a little bit of bad luck. People don't like hearing that, because it's like, oh well, no, you're just blaming it on luck. Whatever, he just got beat. Well, think about it. The 0-2 single that the 9-hole hitter hit was on a pitch out of the zone. The dude just stuck his bat out there and poked it into right. Just a good piece of hitting. The other single, the single to right, that was a chopper that just bounced over McLaughlin's head at first base. If it bounces differently, or McLaughlin's positioned differently, it's an easy out. They were not well hit balls. And then even the home run that Culpepper hit just barely got out. Wilmsmeyer said he thinks it maybe missed his glove by about a foot or so. There was a little bit of bad luck there. Kind of brings me back to the very first start of the season where we only went one inning against James Madison. There was some bad luck in there. If the wind wasn't blowing the way it was, the ball didn't fly out of the park and be a 3-run homer, and who knows what happens. So, baseball's a funny game sometimes, and it was really unfortunate that all the bad luck kind of clumped together in one inning and basically was the result of resulted in Arkansas ending its season.
For sure. What I will say to that, though, is there's a saying, you create your own luck. And I think Hagen created his own bad luck in that inning by walking the first two guys. I mean, that's just something when you've got a 2-0 lead, and you've got a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. I mean, look, Kansas State hit him right afterwards. They hit him, but they had momentum at that point when the hits started rolling because they had 2 on and no out. I mean, you got to go out there when your team gives you the lead and pound the zone. And it's, it feels weird criticizing Hagen Smith right now because of how good he's been, how much he has carried this team. And as DVH said yesterday, you take him off the team, they're an average team. I mean, do they make the tournament if Hagen Smith's not on this team? Probably, but it's a question. So it feels weird criticizing him there, but at the end of the day, those were the ridiculously high standards that he set for himself. And unfortunately, in the biggest moment, he wasn't able to kind of live up to those standards. But that doesn't just go for Hagen. I think that goes for the entire pitching staff. The Mason Molina did not get the weekend started the way you wanted, only going, 2 2/3 or 2 1/3 innings. Even Will McIntyre unable to kind of eat a lot of outs in that first game. You had to use Gackle for 3 innings. Who knows? I mean, if I'm stuttering here because I just can't believe what I'm saying about this pitching staff. But if Molina and McIntyre get the job done on Friday and you don't have to use Gackle because your offense did score 17 runs, maybe, he comes in instead of Ben Bybee there, and instead of giving up that home run, Gackle shuts down Kansas State. These are all hypotheticals. There's a lot of ifs and, what could have happened. At the end of the day, though, this team, its offense was not good enough to get to Omaha. And I think over the course of the season, we kind of inched our mindsets that way, and it bore out like that at the regional, especially leaving 13 runners on base against Kansas State. They should have won that game, even with Hagen struggling. You get one more hit in one of those 5 innings where you leave multiple runners on, and Arkansas wins that game, and they don't have to come back early the next day. They get a good night's sleep, and they have to be beaten twice in this in the span of 24 hours to get sent home.
Yeah, I think that there's plenty of blame to go around. You can't pile on to Hagen too much because there was plenty of other guys that did not perform. And you mentioned, Mason Molina's start not being what you needed. Brady Tigert, being hurt, did not help. And those 2 guys with Hagen is why you thought that this team had a chance to win a national championship, because it was the best starting rotation in college baseball for maybe half the season. That's what it was. They lived up to the hype, and then it just kind of started falling apart. Dave said, one got wild, one got hurt, and they were never able to recover. And I actually found this stat. I was trying to find it real quick. Over the final 18 games of the season, Arkansas's team ERA was 6.28. That's stunning, because the first 42 games of the season, they had a 2.78 team ERA. They were leading the country. And over the last 18 games, that 6.28 ERA raised their season ERA by a full run over 18 games. A full run. They ended up at 3.78. I actually just checked before getting on this podcast. They were first in the nation in ERA. Now they're like 6th or 7th. They've fallen quite a bit. They're not even first in the SEC anymore. I think Tennessee and A&M have moved ahead of them. Now that could change because they're still playing, but oh well. So yeah, there's plenty of blame. It's easy to blame it on the bats because they were so inconsistent. But they did get hot near the ends. You'd like a little bit more timely hitting, as you mentioned. 13 left on base. That's pretty brutal. But yeah, it's not just one area or one coach or one player that I think shoulders the blame. It was a total team effort in the collapse down the stretch.
It's interesting. I think one thing that we might not think about too much right now, and when we look back on this team, but I would like to really, really slam it home right now is the loss of Colin Fisher. I think at the time we were just like, ah, he's a freshman, he's the midweek starter. Like they'll be able to get through the midweeks without him. Ben Bybee was out. He came back kind of at the time Colin Fisher left, and it was like, okay, we're just shuffling one out, one in. It's okay. I think Colin, like when he went down, I think that might coincide with when the pitching staff started to decline a little bit because Bybee just wasn't the same midweek pitcher. So you put more stress on your bullpen arms in the midweek. That less energy, less more innings for those guys headed into the weekend, and you removed a very quality option that DVH would have had when Molina and Tigert started struggling. I think if Colin Fisher's healthy, there's a great chance that he starts that Friday game of the regional, because I think he would have been the first guy to move into the starting rotation instead of Gage Wood when Molina and Tigert were removed. Didn't happen that way because he was injured, and I think every team has to deal with injuries, but there were some pitching staff injuries that I think really played a part. And when you talk about, yes, Tiger Molina got worse, some of the, Cody Frank got worse, Will McIntyre too, but all that has to be connected, I think, with the totality of the pitching staff injuries. And when you don't trust Cody Frank to throw, a single inning down like the last three weeks of the season, that puts more stress on Fouch, on Gackle, on Stone Hewlett, and I think at the end, the entire pitching staff there was a combination of guys getting tired and a lack of trust that DVH had and some of the other guys back towards the end of the bullpen.
Yeah, 1000%. The Fisher loss was proved to be more massive than we imagined. Hunter Dietz is another guy that I'd throw in that conversation. I know we had a little bit more body of work with Fisher because he actually was healthy and pitched, and we saw it in action in real games look good. But as someone who saw Dietz pitch in the fall and knew about him even coming in, like that was a dude that was going to help Arkansas. He was going to throw a lot of innings. Honestly, I think they thought he was going to be like another Gabe Gackle, a left-handed Gabe Gackle, a guy at the back end of the bullpen with electric stuff who could close games for you. And he wasn't healthy, and they tried him. They got him in a couple of games, just didn't go well, and then they shut him back down. He's a guy that it would not surprise me if he has a massive role on next year's team, maybe the team's closer next year, if we're being honest. So I think that was a big loss because think about it. If you had him as well, you throw, even if you have to throw Gackle 3 innings against SEMO, you have Hunter Dietz there to fill in right after Hagen Smith. I mean, Ben Bybee ended up pitching pretty well, except for the one home run that proved to be the difference. But that would have just been another guy to have in the bullpen. In addition to the other guys that fell off down the stretch, the Franks, the McIntyres, guys like that.
Wouldn't surprise me at all if the starting rotation next year, the starting weekend rotation features both Hunter Dietz and Colin Fisher. Maybe he's a closer and a bullpen guy because we haven't, he didn't get this season to kind of build up. But I think there's a scenario where next year's weekend rotation it's going to be some combination of the four of Gabe Gackle, Gage Wood, Hunter Dietz, and Colin Fisher. We'll see who they go for. If they go for anybody in the transfer portal, high school recruits coming in, a lot can change between now and next February. But I mean, if DVH had to go make, if we had to sit them down and be like, hey, who's your starting pitchers for next year? I think those four are probably the leading candidates, right?
I think so. I mean, it's hard to say with Fisher. He did have the internal brace, surgery. It's not Tommy John. He's expected to be back, but you just never know how a guy's going to return from an injury. I mean, Dylan Carter is a guy that had full blown Tommy John, and he wasn't quite the same. I mean, he's throwing harder, but still, not the same as he was last year. I mean, Adam Hatchman, he was a heralded recruit that was freshman on this year's team. I think he had the internal brace, maybe a little bit later than when Fisher had his, but about the same time, and he was never quite able to be able to contribute this year. He redshirted. So yeah, I worry about penciling in Fisher as a starter just because of the health concern. If he was fully healthy, I'd say yes, absolutely, he's in the mix. But and he still is in the mix. I worry about the injury aspect. I think Gabe Gackle certainly is going to be, a starter, or at least going to get every opportunity to be one. I think Gage Wood absolutely, and I really think they're going to go try to get somebody out of the portal. Another Mason Molina type. Hopefully, you can find one that isn't as wild and collapses down the stretch. But I mean, who would have known when you got Mason Molina that would happen? Because he had performed so well in the Big 12, which is a really good baseball conference. So yeah, it's tough to say. They're gonna have talent. That's the thing. They've got plenty of talent on that pitching staff. But they're gonna have to. They've got a lot of innings to replace. Especially depending on what happens with Will McIntyre, if he decides to come back or not. It's kind of like the wild card. But even if he comes back, you're replacing more than half of your innings. 50% of your innings, and that's a lot to replace.
It certainly seemed like in Mac's press conference that
Yeah,
he was not coming back. Very emotional. It was hard to be in the room, but completely understandable for him to have those kinds of emotions. He's contributed a lot to this program. An in-state kid, uh, but maybe some time away. Let the sting kind of settle. We'll see officially on that front. I'm sure in the coming weeks or month or so. I do the one last thing on the pitching staff, and then I think we need to move to the hitting. I think I genuinely think that I think next year's staff it won't be as good as this year's because of Hagen Smith, which is a very obvious take to have by myself. But I do think that there's a chance when you get past the ace of the staff that next year's staff is better than this year's. The arms that were the most consistent for them, I think in short stints, they didn't eat so many innings, but Gabe Gackle, Gage Wood, Christian Fouch, Colin Fisher when he was healthy, all young guys that are coming back. You go out and get a transfer. Parker Coyle, I showed some life towards the end of the year. I definitely think that there's a chance that next year's staff has better depth from maybe top to bottom than this year's did. But they still have to maybe that's at the beginning of the season because this year's staff was so deep at the beginning of the year, and then at the end of the year all of a sudden it wasn't. So it does plan out as I just said, where maybe the depth is better next year. DVH and Coach Hobbs still have to find a way to maintain that depth throughout the course of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it has a chance to be a really, really deep staff again. Especially, I mean, who knows? I don't know what Cooper Dossett's injury is, but he's another guy. Ben Bybee, another guy that I think could be a contributor on that staff. So, and then I'm curious too to see if any of these guys that redshirted this past year, especially Adam, I think it's Hatchman, maybe it's Hackman, the big lefty from the St. Louis area. He was a top 100 recruit, heralded guy, throwing 100 miles an hour before getting hurt. I think he's a guy that could maybe, if he's healthy, contribute. I think it's a pretty deep staff. Plus, they got, of course, several highly regarded recruits coming in. They're going to have lots of pieces. I think they should be fine, and especially once you throw in whatever they do in the transfer portal. I think they're definitely going to go try to get a weekend starter, a high caliber guy. And then maybe another bullpen arm. They added Stone Hewlett last offseason. We didn't think anything of it whenever he added him. I was like, what are they doing? Why are they bringing this guy in? He ended up being a really effective, solid arm for him, even though he didn't eat a lot of innings. But for his role, he did really well. So very, very interested to see kind of what they go do on that regard.
I agree. We've talked about this not on the podcast in the press box at Bomb Walker where I've maybe leaned towards you don't have to go get that weekend guy. I agree. I think they're going to pursue it. My mindset on that is it's just not the top priority for this team. The top priority is bats. We have to get a better offense next year. And by the sound of DVH's press conference yesterday, more athleticism from the roster. I think that plays a part. I think in that defensive mindset of this team, the team was a good defensive team, but I don't. It was a weird one where I didn't feel like they had elite top line defenders, individual defenders, but they did have a solid defense. getting more athletic guys will make the outfield defense better. It'll make the outfield bats better. And that's for me, like if it, you know, NIL is such a big part now of every college sport. Like if you have to decide, okay, we have a a cap on how much NIL spending we've got, and it's, do we get one big bat and one weekend pitcher, or do we get two big bats and trust our tried and true proven pitching development? I would lean towards two big bats. But in an ideal world for this team, I think you get two big bats and a weekend pitcher, and you've got enough NIL money to do all that. And the reason we keep saying this is just because, I mean, the offense, it just stunk this year in for the most part. There were spurts early on in the SEC. They looked okay. That was before Kendall Diggs's injury started really, really impacting the team. But to score 3 runs against SEMO in an elimination game, to leave the 13 runners on base against Kansas State, 7 runners on base against the Red Hawks on Sunday, where they had 2 innings there where they could have flipped the game, and they just didn't get the big hit. Go find 2 outfielders that can come in and hit in the middle of the lineup. I think that is priority 1A, 1B, automatically, and it's imperative that the staff does it, because we're now working on a recent trend of not good enough offense at the postseason. And really, I was looking at some of the numbers. The offense as a whole last year, like, it scored more, but the home run number was not that much more. And if this team's offensive mindset is going to be, we want to hit for power and walks, and we're not going to play small ball, well, then you got to go find the dudes that can do that. Because this year, I think we were all a little fooled into what the roster was outside of Kendall Diggs, Vahiva Aloy, and Peyton Stovall. There just weren't big power bats, and even those guys were way down on the SEC leaderboards in terms of individual home runs. So I don't know. That's a little rant. What do you think, Hutch, about the offense and the future and what this team is going to do?
I was really fascinated by what Dave Van Horn said when I asked him about kind of the philosophical change of the offense, if he would consider a change of philosophy, and it sounds like he does anticipate some change. You mentioned getting better athletes, and I want to first say I feel like a lot of fans took that the wrong way. A lot of people took that as DVH throwing his team, his players under the bus, and it was all their fault. And I don't think that's what it was. I think that was him responding to a question that I asked about the future, and he said, "This is what we're going to do." It's no different than a football coach saying, "Hey, we're going to go away from this air raid attack and try to be a little bit more ground and pound." It's just a philosophical change. It takes different athletes, different kind of players, and I know everyone was like, "Oh, well, he had a team full of home run hitters and they only hit 87 or whatever," which is not a terrible number. Not what we're used to at Arkansas, especially given the uptick in power across the league. When you see Tennessee hitting 140 home runs or something ridiculous, whatever it is, it's pretty jarring. But in their defense, these guys were supposed to be more power hitters than what we saw. Kendall Diggs should have hit double digit. I mean, I would say Kendall Diggs should have hit 17 home runs, and he hit 7 or 8, something like that. I think they expected more juice out of Peyton Stovall, and we saw it once he got healthy. But he was hurt at the beginning of the year. We thought Jack Wagner was going to be a power bat for them that was going to have to get in the lineup somehow, some way. Thought Jason Jones was going to have more power and more of an impact, and these guys just didn't pan out. Now they're the coaches who brought him in, so they do shoulder some of that blame. But I think on paper it should have been a more power hitting team. But Dave said that they want more athletes, and that what he means by that is guys that can run. More guys. Let's just say a more offensive style version of Ty Wilmsmeyer. Like they thought Wilmsmeyer was going to be one of those guys. He hit over 300 at Mizzou, had 21 stolen bases. We just never saw it. He was never really on base enough to steal a bunch of bases for Arkansas. Maybe you get guys that can do that can hit for average with a little bit of pop, and they can just run, and you can maybe manufacture some stuff, and then that's good to fall back on. Sometimes you're going to be able to hit the ball out of the ballpark. Some days you're not going to. Some days you're going to be going up against a really good pitcher, or you're going to be going up against a wind that's blowing in super hard, and you're not going to be able to hit it out of the park. Uh, that's what I'm curious to see if they actually do construct this lineup differently next year. Very fascinated to see what they get out of the portal, if and what they can salvage from the draft, because that's always something to watch. And on that regard, I know they've got a really good. I believe he's a shortstop. I don't know what position he's projected to play in college, but from Nebraska, Tyson Lewis. That's a possible draft risk that I think fits that mold. He's really athletic, fast guy. Be huge to get him on campus if you can. Don't know what haven't dove super close deeply in that signing class, but I'm very interested to see what the offense looks like next year.
Yeah, I don't know. It's I might have we might have talked about this over text, Hutch, really, when the offensive struggles were going on, and I think we said the offense is so disappointing. I think, and that's correct. But I also took a step back and I was like, how many players on this offense are having disappointing seasons, right? By their own standards. Kendall Diggs is an obvious answer, and I think Ty Wilmsmeyer is an obvious answer. Um, Other than those two guys, I think you could have a healthy debate with the rest of the starters. Did they have disappointing seasons, or were they just not these high ceiling offensive guys that you're seeing at Tennessee, Texas A&M, Florida, stuff like that? Vahiva Aloy might be another one. I think, but he led the team in home runs and RBI. So if that was a disappointing season, well, gosh, what does that say for the offense? But Jared Sprague-Lott, I think he exceeded the offensive expectations. Same for Ben McLaughlin. The batting average kind of decreased a little bit, but he got on base a ton, hit for maybe more power than we anticipated. Pretty second on the team in RBIs. I think he did his part. Peyton Holt, Dave probably should have started playing him a little earlier this season, but I think he did what he needed to offensively. Peyton Stovall led the team in average and slugging, and had the second most home runs, even though he missed most of the season. He lived up to the expectations. I think what struck me about Dave's press conference is when you like that philosophy stuff that you mentioned. I think he wasn't belittling his players. I think he was kind of bemoaning the players that his staff targeted and went after in the transfer portal, and that they have to be better in that evaluation process. And when they do bring in these guys through the portal, they have to be hits. And Ty Wilmsmeyer, Jack Wagner, a couple others just did not bring the kind of juice maybe that they would have liked. But at the end of the day, it's hard for me to really look at this offense and say, this is a huge coaching problem, because I don't know how many of these hitters are going to, have long, successful professional careers. Stovall, Aloy, maybe Diggs. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to kind of watch these guys the rest of their baseball careers and see how they develop. And maybe that's how we get to tell whether this is a coaching problem or a player's problem for this year. But of course, we're not going to have that answer for another 3-4 years.
Yeah, and I'll add this. It seemed like last year with their approach to the portal, it seemed like they cast a wide net, and they weren't necessarily going after the big fish. They were casting a wide net and getting a lot of maybe smaller fish. Guys that were quality players at their previous schools, but maybe not super heralded in the portal. They didn't go out and get a Tommy Tanks, or I'm trying to think of some other big time transfers across Braden Montgomery. I think they did go after him some, but they didn't go after one or two of those guys like you were saying earlier. I think they just tried to get as many as they could and go, you know what? Odds are not all of these guys are going to suck. Some of these are going to hit, because they had a pretty good track record of guys that transferred in that produced. I mean, Michael Turner, Chris Lanzilli, Jared Wagner, guys that came from maybe smaller schools and weren't super heralded recruits, super heralded transfers, and they performed really well. And they thought they were going to be able to do that again. I mean, I feel like I'm having the same conversation about the baseball team I did about the basketball team with Eric Musselman. They cast a wide net, got a lot of quality players, thought they weren't all going to suck, going to be able to put it all together, and it just never happened. Not quite to that extreme with the baseball team because they still won 44 games and won the SEC West and were a number 5 national seed. I think we can't forget that. But there were flaws in the way it was constructed. Maybe they go after some bigger name guys and put all their resources, whether it be NIL or whatever, behind just getting a couple of guys, and then just kind of piece it together. Because Jared Sprague-Lott was a very late addition to this team. I remember when they added him, I'm like, what are they doing? Like, why do they need this guy? And then he ended up being one of their better players. Like, if you can get a guy like that in addition to the big players, then that's pretty good. It's just that whenever he's one of your best additions, that's where you run into problems. So I think that's something. And then I also want to touch on this too. Guys having disappointing seasons. I know I've seen some numbers being floated around about guys that their production got worse under Nate Thompson, so it means Nate Thompson's a terrible coach. And they're like throwing out here like Will Edmondson's numbers were worse this year. I'm like, well, no shit, Sherlock. He was playing in JUCO ball in Kansas. Of course, his numbers are going to be worse in the SEC. That's obvious. Okay, that's obvious. Vaheva Aloy, his batting average is not going to be as high in the SEC as it was in the WAC. I think he had a very successful year. Now, are there areas that he definitely can improve on next year to make him a high draft pick? Absolutely. But he had a really good year. Hudson White, go look at Hudson White's numbers. I encourage everyone to do this. Look at his numbers last year and his numbers this year. His batting average and his on-base percentage were 1 point different than they were from Texas Tech last year. His slugging was a little bit down, but he also wasn't playing in the bandbox that Texas Tech plays in. It's a little bit harder to hit home runs. So his numbers are very, very comparable. So it's not like everyone gets worse under Nate Thompson. I think that's cherry picking some stats from people. Like, yes, Ross Lovich, Ty Wilmsmeyer, those guys were disappointing, had disappointing seasons after producing in the SEC. There's other examples too, that guys that their numbers got worse. Some guys' numbers got worse because they transferred in from a lower level. Some guys' numbers got hurt because they got hurt. Kendall Diggs, I think that plays a legitimate role in it. We saw it with Peyton Stovall last year. All we heard about from some fans was like, Peyton Stovall sucks. Look at his batting average. He had like 250. Well, it turns out he's playing through a shoulder injury and got healthy, and look what he did this year. Hit 349 bombs and a shortened season. That's pretty good. He turned out to be pretty all right. So I say all that to say, should they fire Nate Thompson? I don't know. It's a little bit more nuanced than people maybe make it seem. Like, it's not a clear cut, yes, fire him. I could definitely see a case for moving on and just trying to get someone else fresh, new ideas, whatever. I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea, but I also don't think it's, oh my God, Dave Van Horn has lost it. He's terrible because he can't fire him, because there's still some stuff out there that shows that he is a good coach. The numbers definitely, have gone down the last couple of years. So, that's why there's justification if he does move on. But I think this is going to be one of those cases of, can he adapt to what Dave Van Horn is wanting him to do? We heard all year during the football season, Sam Pittman saying, we practiced these plays and we didn't run them in the game. If that happens with Dave Van Horn, Nate Thompson will meet the same fate that Dan Enos did. It's a little bit different in baseball, so it's probably won't happen mid-season or anything. But I think that there's going to be changes made this offseason, and that's why I think it's one of the more fascinating off seasons in recent history, to see kind of if they do kind of change their philosophical approach to offense.
It did not sound like Nate Thompson's going to get fired in the press conference. It did sound like there needs to be changes, which we've discussed. When we talk about the transfer guys that came in, Jared Sprague-Lott was a hit. Hudson White was a hit. They had a lot of struggles from guys that, their biggest struggles were Kendall Diggs and Ty Wilmsmeyer, but Jason Jones too. Everybody in the world thought Ryder Helfrich was going to announce himself as the next great catcher in this program. That didn't happen. I think that there's something to be said for this team. This year's team just lacked high-end talent offensive players. And look, the pitching staff had that high-end talent. It faltered at the end of the year, and some freshmen got hurt, and Brady Tigert got hurt, and we don't. Whoa, my power might have just flashed at my apartment. So let's hope that this doesn't knock me out. But mid podcast, about 40 minutes in. So, anyways, sorry for the distraction there. We don't know NIL numbers, or that maybe we'll get to that point when it starts to become more pay to play instead of this NIL. But I think it's safe to assume, and you can read between the lines, that the NIL of this Arkansas baseball team heavily leaned towards the pitching staff. And I don't think that's a mistake, because when you get to the postseason, you get to Omaha, pitching usually is the difference maker. It was that way with Paul Skeens basically single-handedly pushed LSU to a national championship. And they had great bats in Cruz and White, but they don't win that national championship without Paul Skeens. So if there is going to be a shift in that approach of where the kind of the funds are, diversified, that's something that I'm going to be paying close attention to. And that goes with what you were saying about they casted a wide net with who they were recruiting for the offense. Maybe that net gets smaller. Maybe a guy like Braden Montgomery does come to Arkansas. And I'm not saying Braden Montgomery went to A&M because of NIL. I have no idea. But what I am saying is it seems pretty obvious that this year's team was going to be reliant on the pitching. And for 2.5 months of the season, the offense stunk, and they were still the number one team in the country because that pitching staff was so good and it was all working out. And then all of a sudden, the pitching staff went from to the best in the country to average. Might be harsh, but that ERA number that you just mentioned signifies average. And when that happened, the team kind of fell apart. I think it's very fair to criticize Nate Thompson just based off how the past 2 years have gone. But I don't think it's fair to put all the blame on him when clearly the best talent that this program had this year was in the pitching staff, and it was not in the lineup.
It's interesting because we talk about NIL and like having to figure out where to put your money and all that funds and stuff like that. Like this is like a newfound thing, right? Because NIL hadn't been around that long. But in college baseball, this topic has been one that's been around for decades because coaches have had to figure out how they're going to use their 11.7 scholarships. Dave Van Horn has talked about this a lot over the years. You think back to those early to mid 2000s teams, really the early 2000s, the 2011, 2012, 2013 team, their money was invested in pitching. And it resulted in, the best team ERA in 30-something years in, I believe, 2013. That team was loaded in arms. And then the game kind of evolved. The hitting became more important, a bigger deal because they got rid of the dead bats and dead balls. They made changes to the rules, and suddenly offense was a bigger deal. And so they started maybe investing more on the offensive side. And so he's always kind of had to find the right balance. And it's usually gone pretty well. I mean, they made the College World Series in 2012. They made the College World Series in 2015. They made it again in 18, 19, 22. So, I mean, Dave Van Horn has adapted. He's changed the way he's approached roster construction. This NIL, unlike, say, football or even basketball, this is something I feel like Dave is better equipped to handle than those other sports just because he's had to do it with his scholarships. And obviously, Dave isn't doing all this because that would be an NCAA violation because it has to be all third party, not associated with the school. I'm not saying that, but if he did, I think he would make sure it's being distributed the way it needs to do. And I still have the utmost confidence that he's going to be able to put a good product on the floor or on the field.
Yeah, the fire DVH stuff is asinine. Look, I haven't been here long. I might, I don't have that same scar tissue that Arkansas fans or media members have from, even last year, or the past 2 years of however long, these frustrations have been bubbling of just not getting the job done. And I get it. Arkansas fans want to win a national championship in baseball. And it's really stung to watch some of your league and division rivals get to the mountaintop in recent years. You want that. But calling for DVH's head after another 40-win season that resulted in a top 8 seed and one of the best pitching staffs that this program has ever produced statistically, you just don't sound smart, calling for his head. You sound entitled to a national championship that you've never won, a national championship that has never been closer than it is with DVH leading the program. And, I can already, I can hear some criticisms of, Van Horn and these past 2 years, and you want to go get an outsider and fresh blood. Well, Hutch, I grew up a Miami Hurricanes fan, historically one of the best college baseball programs in history. They won 2 national championships when I was a little kid. And the coach that won those titles, Jim Morris, they wanted him out, towards the end of his career in the mid 2000s. It was, we haven't won that national championship since 2001. Get rid of Jim Morris. Let's bring in some fresh blood. Well, Morris retired in, I think, 2018. And you know what? Miami hasn't sniffed Omaha since then. The grass isn't always greener. And it's certainly, it would be a huge risk for that to happen. And all that's to say, it almost feels like a waste of time even talking about it or engaging with it on social media and stuff, because Arkansas's not firing Dave Van Horn. The guy just led you to another national seed, and baseball is a funny game, and we say that, and it's cliche, but look, he did everything right this year in terms of getting this team where it needed to be. And at the end of the day, your best pitcher had one bad inning, and it ruined you. It ruined you. And no, they weren't good enough to win a national championship. But I think DVH put this team in the best possible position it could be in. I don't think this team is nearly as talented as Tennessee, as Texas A&M, as North Carolina, as Clemson. I think they might have been, when you remove Hagen Smith, the least talented of the top 8 national seeds. And that's what you're going to get, is when you have that one power force that lifts you to be one of the best teams in the country, and he loses his start. They lost the Texas A&M game, which he pitched brilliantly in, wasn't his fault, but they lost the Kentucky game in Hoover, and then they lost this last start in the regional. When he can't, lift and carry an average team, it's going to be nearly impossible to get where you want to go. And again, that sounds like I'm blaming Hagen Smith. I'm not. I'm saying he had way too heavy of a load to carry this year, and at the end, it got too heavy for his shoulders, and he just fell at the finish line. And if they get another Hagen Smith in this pitching staff anytime soon, they need to support him with a better roster around him. And I'm confident that DVH can put that roster together. I think this year was kind of enlightening in that the fact that we can't put all our eggs in that pitching basket, and we have to get more creative offensively.
Yeah, I mean, to further your point about Dave Van Horn and like just the coaching job he did this year, but also I know you weren't here, but let's look back at last year. They had no business whatsoever winning the SEC, being a number 3 national seed. That they had no business doing that. They had way too many injuries. Their ace got hurt before the season. They're one of their top arms, Brady Tygart, misses 2 months. They get guys going out with injuries left and right. Some of their best offensive players get hurt and miss time in the season, and yet they just kept winning. And I think that's Dave Van Horn. Dave Van Horn has been the rock, and he is the reason they won. Would last year have felt differently to fans if they had, maybe won as many games as they probably should have, been a 2 seed, gone to Texas Tech or TCU or something, played TCU on the road in Fort Worth and lost in a regional final last year? Would that have felt differently than if they been the number 3 national seed, hosted TCU and lost on your home field? I don't think you should hold that against Dave Van Horn. Like that, it's not Dave Van Horn's. He got you there. He is the reason they won as many games as they did. Really, it's the same reason they won as many games as they did this year. He talked about it in his post game, saying there were a lot of tight games, a lot of close games, 3 runs or less, and they won a majority of them. They really did, and I think that's a testament to Dave Van Horn. The dude just wins. I think he's going to keep getting you in position. Does he ever get you over the mountaintop and win a national title? I still think he does. Maybe that's just the optimist in me. But he's at least getting you in position to do that. That's tough. That's tough to do, and I think he deserves credit for that. I really do. So and I think you're right. I think it's crazy talk. Dave Van Horn's not going anywhere until he wants to go somewhere and retire. So that's kind of, not really a talking point, but yeah, I think Dave Van Horn deserves a lot of credit for the success they've had over the last 2 years, even though there hasn't been the postseason success.
Let's put a bow on this podcast, Andrew. This year, first off, when we look back on it, do we think that this team overachieved, underachieved, or achieved as much as they kind of maxed out, appropriately maxed out what the expectations were? Because look, it was a preseason top 5 team, and that kind of comes with the expectations of getting to Omaha. That didn't happen. That did not happen. So obviously that's an underachievement. But when you look at their regular season success and winning the SEC West title and all that stuff that we just said, there are elements that kind of replicate of what you just said about last year's team and how they had no business doing what they did. When we take a step back and look back at this team and see where these guys end up with their pro careers and everything, and even see where a Nate Thompson or a Matt Hobbs ends up in their coaching arc, what happens with DVH over the next 5 years, and what Arkansas does under his stewardship. What do you think we're going to remember from this team?
I think it's going to be remembered as a kind of a what could have been. Kind of like, I would say the basketball season with Anthony Black, Nick Smith, Jordan Walsh, that group, I think is kind of a what if. Trevor in Brazil. I think we remember they still had success. They still made the Sweet 16, but it was still like, man, if all the pieces had been what we thought they were going to be, that was a team that could have made a Final Four run. I think it's going to be similar to that with this baseball team. We're going to remember Hagen Smith being amazing. We're going to remember that. We're going to remember the pitching staff was amazing for 2/3 of the season, and then it fell apart. And that's going to be the what if. Like, man, what if Brady Tiger had stayed healthy? What if Mason Molina had been able to keep it together and be the dominant starter we thought he was going to be? What if the offense, the guys that we thought were going to produce, Kendall Diggs, all those guys had produced the way we thought they were going to do, and they did it at points? It's really hard to win a national championship. You got to have all that come together, and it just didn't. But I also think this is going to be something we don't really know an answer to until several years down the line. But I'm also curious if maybe this is going to be looked back at as a turning point. If they really do make the offensive philosophical changes that Dave Van Horn kind of talked about making, maybe we look back at this and go, okay, this is what sprungboard them into even another echelon of success. Whether that be winning a national title or just consistently making it to Omaha 3, 4, 5 years in a row, something like that, something crazy, because they've already been so successful. Kind of like how we look back, for those of us that were here, the 2016 season. They lost 11 or 13 games in a row to end the year, finished under 500, missed the NCAA tournament. That season sprung-boarded them into this current run we're on. I firmly believe that. 2017 to now, I think they're the winningest program in college baseball. That year, that probably wouldn't have happened if it had not been for that year. They made some big-time changes. I think they got a new pitching coach after that year. I think Tony Vitello was still on the staff that year, but he was early in his tenure. But it really helped them take that next step. I'm curious if maybe the end of this, the way this season ended, might be the springboard to future, even greater levels of success.
I like that. And what I will say though is we talked a lot about transfers and guys that are leaving. Where are they going to end up? The only way that this season brings forth that positive turning point that you're not necessarily predicting, but saying could happen is inward development still has to remain king. And there's three guys that look, maybe I'm putting too much pressure on it, but Nolan Souza, Ryder Helfrich, Vahiva Aloy. This is their team now, and it's their lineup. And I think Vahiva did pretty well. I think he didn't do as well as Arkansas coaches maybe predicted, or fans would have wanted. I think they maybe thought he would have hit for a little bit more power, a little bit more consistency, but did okay. Souza had such a hot streak at one point, but then really fell off a cliff down the stretch. But one of your higher recruits, Helfrich, obviously, we already mentioned him. He's kind of the future face of the catcher position, and there was so much hype. Those three guys have to develop, and they've got to be everyday starters that are contributing at a high level in the SEC. And you've got to get the same thing from the pitchers that you are now going to turn from some bullpen guys and maybe weekday starters into the top of your line rotation. And that's going to be the key, because when you look at this year's team, the inward development, Peyton Stovall, yes. Kendall Diggs, no, this year, right? Ben McLaughlin, yes. Jason Jones, no, this year. That inward development needs to remain at a high level, and I think it needs to be a little bit more consistent with these top tier talent guys that they're bringing into the program. Jason Jones, it's easy to kind of beat up on him, and for the struggles that he's had. Him not turning out to be a power bat, and that can hit middle or bottom of your lineup and hit 240 but hit 10 home runs, that hurt. That became a position that they couldn't solve all year, left field, until they just stuck Peyton Holt out there. And even then you couldn't solve center field, with Ty Wilmsmeyer. That's going to be, I think, the biggest. Yes, they got to go to the portal. They got to do all that. I have faith that they're going to do that. Can they bring out the absolute best out of Nolan Souza, Vahiva Aloy, Ryder Helfrich, Gabe Gackel, Colin Fisher, all these guys that we've mentioned? If they can, they will be back. They will be a regional host next year. They've done it 6 of the past 7 seasons. There's been a tournament. They're going to be one of the best teams in the country. And then it's a matter of those fringe pieces working in. But that's going to be kind of the biggest question for me all off season is the guys coming back. Can we get them to be stars on this team? And we'll see. I think they can. And Dave Van Horn has a track record of development. Matt Hobbs certainly does. Nate Thompson, he showed it early in his tenure here. The last couple of years have been kind of down. We'll find out, I guess, won't we?
Yeah. I think that's a very, very good point. I think that the development of those guys is huge. That could maybe even be one somewhat criticism of this year's team, is that they didn't get that. I mean, you mentioned Kendall Diggs. Again, I think I still put a little asterisk by it because of the injury. Peyton Stovall, but look at the guys that were starting on this team. They were all mostly transfers. I mean, Hudson White behind the plate. Ben McLaughlin was a JUCO transfer. Peyton Stovall was homegrown, but then you got Aloy at short, Sprague Lott at third. You got the outfield pieces of Wilmsmeyer, Lovich, Edmondson was a JUCO guy. The other guys were transfers. I mean, it was a lot of imported pieces. I think if you can maybe develop your pieces, I think that's where Arkansas has been really good over the years is developing those pieces. Hopefully they don't get away from that. Don't fall victim to the glitz and the glamour of the transfer portal. Develop your guys, get a piece or two from the portal, and mesh it together and build yourself an awesome team.
Definitely. All right, an hour. I think that's a good wrap. Really a fun baseball season. I know it did not end the way that Arkansas fans would have hoped, but there's something to be said for consistency. I know Arkansas fans really want that national championship, but I saw a question on Twitter. I don't remember what user asked it, but hey, would you rather be Ole Miss that has won national championship but has been down for a while and you don't get to enjoy, 3 straight baseball seasons or however many it's been? Or do you want to be, Arkansas, and every season you are enjoying it and you're you're stressfully enjoying it, thinking that you could maybe win a national championship and not living up to expectations. But at least the ride there is filled with wins and stuff. And I think it's something to be said that is not nearly appreciated enough is just the overall consistency. And I had a blast covering it. I had a blast talking to you about the whole season, Hutch. And I think we probably will take a little bit of a break here for the summer with the Hoggin the Mic podcast, but we'll be back for some preseason football stuff, and of course, Sam Pittman's glorious ride to 500 season. Find out later this fall. So thank you very much, Hutch, for joining me. I will see you soon, and thank you to the listeners, as always, for listening to Hagen the Mic. We will be back at a date to be determined. Had a lot of fun this baseball season.